Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
You wake up thinking the world owes you understanding, that it should pause and hear your excuses, that your story matters before your impact. But here's the truth. It doesn't. Pain doesn't grant permission. Struggle doesn't grant exemption. This world responds to output, not intention. And the longer you spend justifying your stalling, the louder life replies with indifference. Nobody's checking in on your reasoning. They're measuring your reach. And if you're not producing, you vanish. Quietly. That's the rule. Harsh, cold, but permanent. Every time you say, "I can't," you train your nervous system to associate discomfort with defeat. You think you're being honest, but you're actually reinforcing limits, not real ones, learned ones. And the more often you voice them, the deeper they embed, until one day, "I can't" becomes your gospel, a story you repeat until you believe it. But belief doesn't make it true. Belief just makes it invisible. It hides your options beneath a veil of assumed incapacity, and that veil becomes your prison. Here's what no one tells you. Life will not stop to investigate your limits. It doesn't dig through your trauma for justification. It doesn't care about your mental blocks, your rough childhood, your genetics, or your failures. Life isn't heartless. It's just occupied. While you explain, others execute. While you wait to feel ready, they move without certainty. And by the time you find the courage to act, they've already taken the position you thought you were entitled to. The worst thing about "I can't" is how reasonable it sounds. It disguises itself as realism, as maturity, as caution. But it's none of those things. It's avoidance in a suit. It's comfort posing as wisdom. The truth? You're scared, not of failure, but of responsibility. Because if you can, then you must. And that weight terrifies people. So they build shrines to their limits. They call them boundaries. They call them truth, but they're walls. Walls made of fear, painted with logic. You don't break through by waiting. You break through by breaking. By saying "I will" when your body screams "I can't," because that's the only moment growth begins, at the point of betrayal. When you betray your comfort, when you turn your back on the easy version of yourself and walk directly into the fire. That fire, that's you being forged. That's where the excuses melt. That's where the real voice comes out. The one that never needed pity, only permission. People spend years perfecting their reasons. They journal them, therapy them, share them, repeat them, until their entire identity is wrapped around why they never started. But reasons don't create legacy. Results do. And the only thing worse than failure is being forgotten because you never even entered the arena. The world doesn't need your story. It needs your movement. It needs the version of you that shows up anyway. Bloody, late, uncertain, but present. You want power? Kill your explanation reflex, the part of you that needs people to know how hard it was. Shut it down. Be silent. Let your actions speak in a language no apology could ever match. Let them see your scars through your output, not your confessions. When you move like that, without seeking validation, without begging for permission, people stop doubting you. They start fearing you. Because the man who moves without sympathy becomes inevitable. No one cares why you can't, and they shouldn't. Because if reasons mattered more than results, the world would be run by victims, but it's not. It's run by finishers, by those who crawl, claw, adapt, and rewire. Not because it was easy, but because they refused to accept can't as final. Can't was just a signal, and they answered with war. It's not about shame, it's about ownership. You're not broken, you're disconnected from your real capability. And the only way back is through decisive, relentless action, not in spite of your reasons, but because of them. You owe it to your past to rise without asking the world to understand. You don't need understanding. You need execution. That is how you rebuild your story. In silence, through impact. The market has no empathy. It doesn't pause to reflect on your past. It doesn't hand out rewards for hardship. It doesn't grade your pain. It measures your output brutally, mechanically, consistently. It's not personal, it's transactional. You show up with value, or you don't get a seat. This is where most people fail, not because they lack ability, but because they cling to the belief that suffering equals significance. It doesn't. Pain is a personal experience. The world operates on external contributions. That's why those who thrive are the ones who weaponize their story into service. You had a rough childhood, so did the man sitting across from you, except he turned it into a product. You experienced loss, so did the woman ahead of you, except she translated that grief into design. The difference is never the depth of the wound, it's what you build from it. The market doesn't hand out healing, it hands out contracts. And those contracts are signed with blood, sweat, deliverables, and deadlines. Your trauma is sacred to you, but to the world it's background noise, unless it creates something. This is why the high performers seem cold. It's not because they lack compassion, it's because they've seen the scoreboard. They've been punched by reality too many times to pretend it plays fair, so they stopped asking for fairness. They started creating leverage. They turned internal chaos into external clarity, into frameworks, into platforms, into things people pay for. Because the market doesn't respond to your origin story, it responds to what you ship. Every hour you spend nursing your narrative is an hour you didn't build. The mind wants to believe you need closure before contribution, but it's a lie. You can contribute while bleeding. You can build while broken. In fact, that's the only way anything meaningful gets made. The artist paints from torment. The process is the healing. Creation is therapy, but only if you move. Do you want to feel better, or do you want to matter? Because those paths rarely overlap. Feeling better is internal. Being remembered is external. The world doesn't carve your name into history because you healed. It carves it because you gave something it couldn't ignore, and giving requires pain. Repetitive, exhausting, isolating pain. But what emerges is real, tangible, valuable, something the market can see, touch, and reward. Let go of the idea that your trauma should buy you time. It won't. The clock doesn't pause while you process. Your competitors don't slow down out of respect, and the algorithms don't filter for fairness. They measure clicks, conversions, efficiency. So you have a choice: become bitter or become dangerous. One wallows in memory, the other mines it for material. The market only sees one of them. The more value you produce, the more you start rewriting your past, not with words, but with results. Every sale, every message, every offer, that's you saying, I am not what happened, I am what I do with it. That's the moment your pain stops being dead weight and starts becoming leverage. Not everyone gets there. Most remain prisoners of their narrative, but the decisive few, they break the lock with output. And output by design is merciless. It demands clarity when you want to be emotional. It demands delivery when you want to decompress. It demands consistency when you want catharsis. And in that crucible, your emotions don't vanish, they evolve. They go from wildfires to furnaces. They heat the engine that built something real. The world doesn't care what fuels your excellence, only that you deliver it. This is your power. Your story means nothing until it creates something. And once it does, people will pretend they cared all along. But don't mistake praise for compassion. It's not. It's recognition of utility, of value, and that's enough. You don't need their pity. You need their payment. You don't need applause. You need impact. That's how you win, cold, quiet, and unforgettable. Excuses work like counterfeit money. You can pass them off for a while. The world might even nod sympathetically the first few times. But eventually the system catches on. The ink runs, the paper tears, and what's left isn't a reason, it's a pattern, a predictable rhythm of exit strategies and self-preservation. The man who relies on excuses becomes a magician of avoidance. Every failure wrapped in a narrative, every delay framed as wisdom, every non-action smoothed over by a story. But here's the flaw. That story loses its magic, not just in the eyes of others, but in the eyes that stare back at you from the mirror. The first time you use an excuse, it feels justified. The second time, it feels familiar. By the 10th, it feels normal. That normalization is the death spiral. You no longer see your lack of progress as a problem. You see it as your identity. And when identity fuses with limitation, self-trust dies. Because deep down, you know the truth. You know you had time. You know you could have shown up, but you didn't. And the excuse was easier to live with than the truth. Until the excuses stack so high that even you stop trying to climb over them. Self-trust is not built by victories, it's built by proof. And proof only exists in the gap between intention and action. The smaller that gap, the stronger your integrity. But when excuses widen that gap, they erode the bridge. You promise yourself you'll do it tomorrow, then next week, then next month, and every delay feels small until your word means nothing, not to the world, to you. That erosion isn't loud, it's quiet. It sounds like a sigh, a skipped alarm, a task pushed to later. And those sounds echo louder than any scream of defeat. What makes excuses so dangerous is that they're always dressed in reason. They don't say, "I'm lazy." They say, "I'm tired." They don't say, "I'm scared." They say, "It's not the right time." But your nervous system doesn't care about the language. It records the pattern. It notes that discomfort equals retreat, that challenge equals delay, and once that neurological shortcut gets reinforced enough, it becomes reflex. You don't choose excuses anymore, you default to them. That default is hard to detect until you try to break it. The moment you decide to act, resistance slams down like a hammer, because your nervous system isn't trained for friction, it's trained for escape, and escape, over time, rewires your belief in your own capability. You say, "I'll do it this time," but your body remembers the 100 times you didn't. And that memory carries weight, weight that drags you backward the moment you try to rise. This is why transformation feels impossible to those buried in excuses. Not because the change is too hard, but because the trust in their ability to follow through has been destroyed. And before they can build results, they must first rebuild credibility with themselves. That process is slow, painful, relentless. You have to start small. Do what you say, every single time. No flair, no drama, just consistency. That's how you reclaim your name from the lies you wrapped around it. Most people don't run out of energy, they run out of belief. Because belief doesn't exist in a vacuum, it's a ledger. And every excuse is a withdrawal. Every excuse is debt. Until your confidence is bankrupt. And no affirmation can refill it, only action can. Consistent, brutal, uninterrupted execution. You do. You deliver. You close the loop. That's the repayment. That's how you bring your account back into surplus. And here's the sickest part, most people know this. They feel the decay. They feel the gap widening. They know the excuses sound thin, but they hope no one notices. And worse, they hope they can't feel it. But they do. That shame you carry when you scroll instead of create, that numbness when you delay another promise to yourself, that's not fatigue. That's your identity quietly grieving its own betrayal. You want to rebuild, then become dangerous to your excuses. See them for what they are, false gods with familiar voices. Kill them in the womb. The moment they whisper, "Not today," you move. The second they suggest delay, you deliver. And over time, the power shifts. Your reflex becomes action, your default becomes decisiveness, and your reputation internally becomes one of obedience, not to emotion, not to stories, but to command. Avoidance doesn't feel like failure at first, it feels like safety, like relief, a warm exhale after dodging discomfort. But what you don't see is that relief is chemical. It lights up the same neural pathways as opioids, as gambling, as sugar. The moment you skip the workout, the mind gives you dopamine. The moment you delay the difficult conversation, you feel a flood of ease. And that's the trap, because your brain doesn't know the difference between relief from danger and relief from effort. It just records that inaction equals pleasure, and once that loop is written, you don't even need a reason anymore. You default to retreat, like an addict defaults to the needle. This is how avoidance becomes your operating system. You don't wake up and decide to sabotage your growth. You just begin to associate forward motion with pain, and the brain, built for survival, pulls you back. Not because you're unmotivated, but because you've chemically conditioned it to expect safety in retreat. Over time, "I can't" becomes more than a phrase. It becomes a rewarded behavior, a shortcut to dopamine, a way to feel good without doing anything real. And that reward, repeated daily, becomes law. Now, you're not avoiding because you're lazy. You're avoiding because you're addicted. Your brain has made avoidance efficient, automatic, painless. You dodge the task and feel better. You postpone the risk and feel safe. You don't even question it anymore. And that's the death spiral, when you stop noticing the loss, when you tell yourself, "This is just how I am," without realizing that you trained yourself to be that way, one easy exit at a time. To undo this isn't just a mindset shift, it's a neurological war. You have to rewire the loop. Replace relief with resolve. Teach your brain that discomfort equals growth, that risk equals reward. And the only way to do that is to stop feeding the habit. No more hits of avoidance. No more instant relief. You starve it. You sit in the tension. You do the thing. Badly, awkwardly, tired, and you don't flinch. That's how you break the loop. Not by thinking differently, by behaving differently, long enough for the brain to rewrite itself. Because the more you avoid, the more your brain expects avoidance. The more you choose can't, the more your neurons wire for won't. That's how belief forms, not in your thoughts, but in your habits, in the chemicals that flow every time you duck the hard thing. Eventually, your brain stops even offering you the path forward. It only shows you exits. You live in a mental structure built by past retreats, and you wonder why you can't find the door. That's the lie people live in. They think their confidence is gone because of failure, but failure sharpens. What rots you is delay. What corrodes you is the constant fleeing, the refusal to engage. That's what rewires the mind into a prison, the same circuit over and over again. Fear, retreat, relief, until relief becomes the goal. And anything that threatens it, even progress, is rejected like a virus. You don't protect your future anymore. You protect your comfort. And comfort, when worshipped long enough, becomes your coffin. So how do you fight back? You manufacture friction. You move before you feel ready. You create rewards for action, not escape. You condition your brain to crave the fire. At first, it rebels, it screams, it resists. But the brain is plastic. It learns fast. And when you start giving it dopamine for completion instead of avoidance, momentum returns. And with it, identity. You stop being the man who dodges. You become the one who delivers. And that shift, that's the rebirth. Because now your actions and your chemistry agree. Your behavior aligns with your biology. No more guilt, no more shame, just habit stacked on habit until performance is reflex. Until showing up feels cleaner than quitting. Until the very thought of skipping the hard thing feels toxic. You've reprogrammed the reward. You've made success addictive. And now the loop works for you. The longer you operate inside an avoidance loop, the more your identity calcifies. You don't just avoid the task, you begin avoiding yourself. Your mirror becomes a place of negotiation instead of confrontation. Your promises start sounding like predictions you don't believe. And over time, your inner voice goes quiet. Not because it died, but because you buried it beneath too many dopamine-fueled retreats. There's no inspiration in withdrawal, only sedation. And the man who sedates himself for long enough forgets what purpose even feels like. He doesn't want to win, he just wants the noise to stop. You think the enemy is out there, a system, a structure, a circumstance. But the battlefield is chemical, internal. The enemy is the algorithm you unconsciously built. Your brain doesn't ask for permission before optimizing, it just notices patterns and obeys efficiency. You flinch when things get hard, it learns that flinching is safety. You delay when stakes get high, it learns that pressure equals paralysis. You reward yourself for survival instead of significance. It learns that doing nothing is victory, and by the time you realize what you've taught it, the behavior has become belief, a self-imposed hypnosis. The only way out is disruption, not with motivation. That's too fleeting. Too light. You need resistance. You need repetition. You need to outcode your own programming with force. You need to introduce pain where you used to inject comfort, and then stay there until your nervous system doesn't see pain as threat, until it sees friction as proof, until it wants the hard path more than the easy one, because it craves what's earned, not what's given. That's what real recovery looks like, not emotional resolution, but biochemical rebellion. This is why so many people can't explain why they stopped trying. Because it wasn't a moment, it was a drift 1,000 micro-decisions soaked in comfort, wrapped in logic, and processed as reward. Their brain slowly taught itself that quitting feels better than pushing, so now they look at challenge like a foreign language. Not because they don't want it, but because their wiring can't process it, not yet. And until they force the system to relearn effort as currency, they will continue calling avoidance self-care, while their destiny suffocates in silence. But you won't solve this with journaling, or with one big decision, or a perfect morning routine. You solve this with micro-confrontation, daily, ruthless, invisible. You solve it when the craving to quit hits and you don't move. When the thought to delay whispers and you don't flinch. You stay in the fire, not to prove something to others, but to finally convince your nervous system that safety no longer lives in surrender. That relief is a cheap god. And the only feeling worth chasing now is the one that comes after the work. That moment of clean internal pride, when you did what needed to be done, without giving your brain the hit of escape it begged for. That's real power. The kind no one sees, the kind no one applauds, but the kind that rebuilds everything. Most people are hooked on escape because they've never truly felt the weight of follow-through, of doing exactly what they said they would, not for applause but for alignment.